You look harmless, but the greatest mistake people can make is assuming that kindness is the same as weakness. There are people who will look at your quietness and think you have no strength. They will see your patience and mistake it for fear. They will watch you walk away from arguments and convince themselves that you had nothing to say. They will mistake self-control for surrender. They will believe that because you refused to fight like everyone else, you were incapable of standing your ground. But they misunderstood something important. The strongest people are often the ones who do not need to announce their strength. Real power does not always raise its voice. Real confidence does not always demand attention. Real wisdom knows that every battle is not worth fighting. If you have ever been underestimated because of your calm nature, because of your gentle spirit, because you chose peace over pride, then listen carefully. There is a difference between being harmless and being powerless. A person can choose mercy while still possessing incredible strength. History is full of people who were dismissed because they looked ordinary. David was just a shepherd in the eyes of others. Joseph was just a prisoner. Esther was just another young woman brought into the palace. Daniel was just another exile in Babylon. Yet each of them carried something far greater than people could see. Their strength was hidden beneath humility. Their courage was hidden beneath quiet obedience. Their influence was hidden until the right moment arrived. That is often how God works. He develops people in private before revealing them in public. He builds character before he builds influence. He teaches endurance before he entrusts responsibility. Many people are fascinated by visible success, but they ignore the invisible years that made it possible. Those hidden years matter. They shape the soul. They teach patience. They reveal what truly lives inside a person. Perhaps you've spent years being overlooked. Perhaps people talked over you in meetings. Perhaps they assumed your silence meant you lacked intelligence. Perhaps they believed your kindness made you easy to manipulate. For a while, those assumptions may have hurt. You may have wondered if you should become louder, more aggressive, more intimidating, more like the people who seem to get ahead by force. But deep inside, something held you back. Because you knew becoming bitter would cost you more than it would ever give you. There is an old saying that the loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. Sometimes the strongest person is the one who remains calm when everyone else loses control. Anyone can react. Not everyone can respond with wisdom. That is where true strength begins. People often imagine revenge as anger, as shouting, as destruction, as making someone suffer the way they made you suffer. But revenge has never truly healed a wounded heart. It may satisfy anger for a moment, but it cannot restore peace. Scripture repeatedly warns against taking vengeance into our own hands. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the justice of God. Those words are difficult, especially when you've been treated unfairly, especially when lies have been spoken about you. Especially when opportunities were taken from you because someone chose jealousy over integrity. Everything inside you may want to settle the score. Yet God's wisdom points toward another path. Not because justice is unimportant, but because bitterness slowly transforms the person carrying it. Imagine carrying a heavy stone every day. At first you think you're holding it to remind yourself of what happened. Eventually you realize it has been slowing your own steps. That is what resentment often does. It promises protection. Instead it becomes a burden. Now think about another possibility. What if the greatest answer to those who underestimated you is not revenge, but growth? What if your response is becoming the person they never expected you could become? What if your answer is living with integrity when they expected hatred? What if your answer is succeeding without becoming arrogant? What if your answer is refusing to let someone else's darkness define your future? That kind of response surprises people. Because it cannot be explained by pride alone. Joseph experienced this. His brothers betrayed him. They sold him. They lied about him. Years later, Joseph stood in a position of authority they never imagined. He finally possessed the power to destroy the people who had destroyed his life. If anyone had a reason to seek revenge, it was Joseph. Yet something remarkable happened. He chose mercy. Not because the betrayal wasn't real. Not because the pain had disappeared. But because God had transformed his perspective. Joseph understood that becoming consumed by revenge would only continue the cycle of destruction. Instead, he chose forgiveness. That decision required greater strength than revenge ever would have required. Many people believe power is measured by how much damage you can cause. The Bible often reveals something different. Power is also measured by what you refuse to do. Refusing to lie when lying would benefit you. Refusing to hate when hatred seems justified. Refusing to become like those who wounded you. That restraint is not weakness. It is discipline. And discipline is one of the greatest forms of strength. Perhaps someone watching this feels invisible. You have spent years trying to prove yourself. Trying to earn respect. Trying to convince people that you are capable. Yet no matter what you accomplished, some people continued seeing only the version of you they created in their minds. Eventually you become tired. Not because you lack ability, but because constantly defending yourself drains the soul. Here is something worth remembering. You cannot force everyone to see you accurately. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you because it protects the story they have already chosen to believe. Chasing their approval will only exhaust you. Instead, invest your energy where it can actually bear fruit. Grow in wisdom. Grow in character. Grow in faith. Grow in skill. Those investments cannot be taken away by another person's opinion. There is another truth that many people overlook. Calm people are often observing far more than others realize. They notice patterns. They notice motives. They notice character. Because they spend less time speaking and more time listening. Silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is discernment. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is wisdom refusing to react too quickly. Jesus himself often remained silent before those who wanted to trap him. His silence was not fear. It was control. Control over his emotions. Control over his purpose. Control over his mission. Not every accusation deserved an answer. Not every insult deserved a response. That kind of maturity is rare. In a world that rewards instant reactions, quiet wisdom stands out. Perhaps your greatest victory will never be proving someone wrong. Perhaps it will be becoming someone whose life speaks louder than every false assumption ever could. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the opinions which once controlled your emotions no longer hold that power. Imagine being free from the need to win every argument. Imagine trusting God enough that you no longer carry the burden of settling every score. That is freedom. It does not mean ignoring injustice. It means refusing to let injustice determine the direction of your heart. People may still underestimate you. Let them. People may still misunderstand your intentions. Continue living with integrity. People may still question your decisions. Remain faithful. Time has a way of revealing character. Truth has a way of outlasting rumors. Consistency has a way of exposing pretenses. And God has a way of honoring faithfulness in His timing. The world often celebrates dramatic revenge stories. The gospel tells a different story. It points us toward redemption, toward forgiveness, toward justice entrusted to God, toward strength expressed through self-control. That path is not easy, but it is transformative. It changes not only your future but your heart. So yes, you may look harmless. You may be quiet. You may be gentle. You may choose peace. But never mistake peace for weakness. The strongest people are often those who have the power to strike back and choose a better way. Their greatest victory is not the defeat of an enemy. It is refusing to let hatred become their master. And in the end, that kind of strength leaves a legacy far greater than revenge ever could. You look harmless. That is what they have always believed. They looked at the way you carried yourself and decided they already knew your story. They saw your calm voice and assumed you had no fire within you. They watched you walk away from conflict and convinced themselves you lacked courage. They noticed that you rarely argued, rarely demanded attention, rarely fought to be seen, and they concluded that you could easily be ignored. What they never understood is that there is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. The strongest trees in the forest do not spend their days proving how deep their roots are. The deepest rivers do not make the loudest noise. The brightest stars never compete with the darkness. They simply shine. If you have spent years being underestimated because you chose patience over pride, wisdom over noise, or humility over arrogance, then this message is for you. The world often rewards people who appear powerful. God often works through people who appear ordinary. David looked ordinary. Joseph looked defeated. Esther looked insignificant. Daniel looked powerless. Yet each one carried a purpose that people around them could not recognize. Sometimes people judge your current position while God is preparing your future. Sometimes they see the chapter while God sees the entire story. That difference changes everything. There is something exhausting about constantly being misunderstood. You replay conversations in your mind. You wonder if you should have explained yourself better. You ask whether people would finally understand if they only knew your heart. But eventually you discover something important. Not everyone who misunderstands you is looking for understanding. Some people have already chosen the version of you they want to believe. No amount of explanation can change a mind that has already closed its doors. That realization hurts. Especially if you genuinely care about people. Especially if you have always tried to do the right thing. Especially if your greatest desire has been to live with integrity. Yet there comes a moment when you must decide whether you will spend your life chasing approval or building character. Approval changes. Character remains. Popularity changes. Integrity remains. Crowds change. Truth remains. Perhaps that is why Scripture places so much emphasis on the condition of the heart. People are naturally drawn to appearances. God sees deeper. He notices motives hidden behind actions. He notices quiet faithfulness that no one applauds. He notices sacrifices made without recognition. He notices prayers whispered in empty rooms. Nothing escapes his attention. Many people think strength is measured by how much damage someone can cause. But Scripture repeatedly points toward another kind of strength. The strength to forgive. The strength to remain honest when dishonesty seems easier. The strength to refuse hatred even after being wounded. The strength to continue loving after disappointment. That strength is rare. It is also costly. Anyone can react. Not everyone can respond with wisdom. There is a difference. Reaction is immediate. Wisdom is intentional. Reaction is driven by emotion. Wisdom is guided by purpose. Reaction asks, how do I make them feel what I felt? Wisdom asks, who am I becoming through this? That second question changes everything. Because every difficult season is shaping someone. The only question is whether it will shape you toward bitterness or toward maturity. Joseph faced that decision. Imagine standing before the very brothers who betrayed you. Imagine having the authority to punish those who once sold you. Imagine finally possessing the power that they once abused against you. Most people would call that the perfect opportunity for revenge. Joseph chose something else. He chose mercy. That decision did not erase the pain. It did not pretend the betrayal never happened. It revealed that God had done something greater inside Joseph than circumstances had done against him. That is transformation. Not when the past disappears, but when the past no longer controls your future. Some people will continue believing what they want regardless of the evidence. If your peace depends on changing every opinion, you will never truly rest. Real freedom begins when you realize that your identity cannot be built upon other people's conclusions. It must rest on something stronger. The opinions of people rise and fall like waves. One day they celebrate you. The next day they question you. If your confidence depends entirely upon applause, criticism will destroy you. But if your confidence rests in God's faithfulness, both applause and criticism lose much of their power. David experienced both. He was celebrated after defeating Goliath. Later he was hunted by Saul. The same people who once praised him eventually questioned him. His circumstances changed. God's faithfulness did not. That remains true today. Perhaps someone listening has quietly carried wounds that nobody else knows about. Not physical wounds. The wounds of disappointment. The wounds of betrayal. The wounds of being overlooked. The wounds that come when your motives are questioned even though your intentions were sincere. Those wounds can slowly convince you that becoming cold is safer than remaining kind. That trusting no one is wiser than risking another disappointment. That isolation is easier than vulnerability. Those thoughts are understandable. But they are not where healing is found. Healing rarely comes from building higher walls. Healing comes from allowing God to restore what pain tried to steal. There is courage in remaining compassionate after disappointment. There is courage in choosing honesty after someone lied to you. There is courage in refusing to let another person's actions determine your character. That kind of courage changes lives. The world often mistakes gentleness for weakness. Scripture describes gentleness as strength under control. A powerful horse trained by a skilled rider is not weak because it obeys direction. Its strength is made more useful because it is disciplined. The same is true of the human heart. Undisciplined anger destroys. Disciplined strength protects. One tears down. The other builds. When Jesus stood before those who falsely accused him, there were moments when he remained silent. His silence was not helplessness. It was purpose. He did not need to answer every accusation to fulfill his mission. There is wisdom in knowing which battles deserve your energy. Not every criticism requires your attention. Not every insult deserves your response. Not every misunderstanding must become your lifelong assignment. Sometimes your greatest answer is a life consistently lived with integrity. Consistency speaks. Character speaks. Faithfulness speaks. Over time they often communicate more clearly than arguments ever could. Perhaps you have spent too much energy trying to convince people who were never willing to listen. Imagine what would happen if that same energy were invested in growth instead. Learning. Serving. Praying. Building healthy relationships. Developing wisdom. Helping others. Those investments always produce fruit. They shape the kind of person you become. That matters far more than winning temporary arguments. One day you may discover that the people who underestimated you were never the audience you needed to impress. Your life was never meant to revolve around proving someone wrong. It was meant to reflect the goodness of God in whatever season you found yourself. That perspective changes the way you approach every challenge. Instead of asking, "How do I get even?" you begin asking, "How do I remain faithful?" Instead of asking, "How do I make them regret what they did?" you begin asking, "How do I grow through what happened?" Those questions lead toward freedom. Because revenge promises satisfaction but often leaves emptiness. Growth requires patience but leaves lasting peace. There may come a day when people who misunderstood you finally recognize the truth. If that happens, receive it with humility. Do not allow vindication to become pride. Remember the seasons when you also needed grace. Remember the times when God was patient with you. Mercy received should become mercy given. That does not mean ignoring injustice. It means refusing to become the very thing that once wounded you. Your greatest victory is not making others suffer. It is refusing to let suffering define your character. The strongest response is often the quiet one. The steady one. The faithful one. The one that keeps choosing what is right even when shortcuts seem easier. The one that keeps believing that truth matters. The one that trusts God with what cannot be controlled. People may continue to underestimate you. Let them. People may misunderstand your silence. Let them. People may overlook your faithfulness for a season. Keep walking anyway. Because your future is not ultimately determined by those who misjudge you. It is shaped by the choices you make every day, choices to love, to forgive, to persevere, to grow in wisdom, and to remain faithful. That is a legacy no criticism can erase. That is a strength no rumor can weaken. And that kind of strength, though it may look quiet from the outside, has the power to transform a life from the inside out. There is something that happens when a person spends enough time being underestimated. At first, it hurts. Every careless comment feels personal. Every rejection feels permanent. Every closed door feels like proof that perhaps everyone else was right. But then, if you continue walking with faith, something begins to change. You stop measuring yourself through the eyes of people who never truly knew you. You begin measuring your life by a different standard. Not by applause. Not by popularity. Not by how many people agree with you. But by whether you remained faithful to the person God is calling you to become. That shift is quiet. Most people will never notice the day it happens. There are no celebrations. No announcements. No audience applauding from the sidelines. Yet that invisible change becomes one of the greatest victories a person can experience. Because from that moment forward, your peace is no longer held hostage by someone else's opinion. Think about how much energy people spend trying to control what others think. We edit our words. We second-guess our choices. We replay conversations long after they are over. We imagine arguments that never happened. We create explanations for people who were never interested in listening. Eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. Not because life is impossible, but because carrying everyone's expectations was never your assignment. God never asked you to become everything for everyone. He asked you to be faithful. Faithfulness looks ordinary. It often goes unnoticed. No one applauds the daily decision to remain honest. Few people celebrate the quiet act of forgiving someone who will never know the battle taking place inside your heart. The world notices dramatic moments. Heaven notices consistent ones. There is a reason Scripture compares faithfulness to planting seeds. A farmer does not plant today expecting a harvest tomorrow. He understands that growth takes time. Roots grow before fruit appears. The same principle applies to your character. Long before people notice the fruit in your life, God has already been strengthening your roots. Those roots are formed through disappointment, through waiting, through unanswered questions, through moments when choosing integrity costs more than compromise. Those seasons are uncomfortable. Yet they are necessary. Because anything that grows quickly without deep roots rarely survives strong storms. Perhaps you have wondered why your journey has taken longer than someone else's. Why opportunities seem delayed. Why recognition came slowly. Why it felt as though everyone else was moving ahead while you remained in the same place. Comparison has a way of stealing gratitude. It convinces you that your story should look like someone else's. But God's work in each life is unique. David was anointed as king long before he wore a crown. Joseph received dreams long before they became reality. Abraham received promises that took years to unfold. Delay was not proof that God had forgotten them. It became part of their preparation. Maybe the waiting season in your own life has also been preparation. Preparation rarely feels exciting. It often feels repetitive, ordinary, hidden. But hidden seasons are not wasted seasons. A building cannot stand without a strong foundation. No one admires the foundation once the building is complete. Most people notice only what rises above the surface. Yet without what remained hidden, nothing visible could survive. Character works the same way. The world celebrates talent. God develops character. Talent may open a door. Character determines whether you remain there. Many people pray for influence. Far fewer pray for the wisdom required to handle influence well. God often answers the second prayer before the first. Because He cares more about who you become than about how quickly you succeed. That truth may not satisfy your impatience. But it should encourage your heart. You are not being shaped by accident. Every challenge has presented an opportunity. Every disappointment has revealed something about your heart. Every delay has invited you to trust God more deeply. That does not mean every painful event was sent by God. It means God is able to work through even painful events to accomplish good in those who love Him. That promise has comforted believers for generations. Not because it removes every question, but because it reminds us that suffering is never the final chapter. Sometimes people ask why God allows them to be misunderstood. There is no simple answer for every situation. Yet throughout Scripture we see that misunderstanding has often accompanied faithfulness. Noah built while others mocked. Jeremiah spoke truth that many refused to hear. Paul was imprisoned despite his faithfulness. Even Jesus was misunderstood by those closest to him. Misunderstanding is painful. But it is not proof of God's absence. Sometimes it is simply part of living faithfully in a broken world. That realization changes how you interpret your struggles. Instead of believing every hardship means you have failed, you begin asking how God is inviting you to trust Him within that hardship. Trust grows one decision at a time. Every time you choose forgiveness instead of resentment. Every time you choose honesty instead of deception. Every time you choose humility instead of pride. Those choices slowly transform your heart. Transformation is rarely dramatic. It is usually gradual. Like sunrise. You hardly notice the light increasing until suddenly darkness has disappeared. The same happens spiritually. You continue praying. Continue learning. Continue serving. Continue trusting. Then one day you realize something remarkable. The things that once controlled your emotions no longer possess the same power. The insults do not wound as deeply. The criticism no longer defines your identity. The fear that once kept you awake at night has begun to lose its voice. That is growth.